It's that time again, another year has passed and it's Game of the Year time. As always, I've decided to put together a list of my personal favorite games of this year. There were a lot of great titles released after all, and some controversy as well, but we're here just to focus on quality today. For this video then, I've assembled a list of 11 games. Yes, 11, an uneven number to be sure, but I feel that each of these games deserves a mention. And of course, as the creator of DF Retro, it should come as no surprise that my list is perhaps influenced by my love of classic games, so keep that in mind. So without further ado, let's jump in to number 11. The first game on this list is a brand new game for the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis that has also made an appearance on other platforms such as Switch and PS4. Perhaps its selection shouldn't come as a huge surprise, but surprise is what I felt while playing Zeno Crisis. You see, I simply didn't expect it to be this fun. At its core, Zeno Crisis is basically a spiritual successor to the likes of Smash TV, but with tighter mechanics and some additional twists along the way. What makes the game work so well is this perfect blend of ultra-tight controls, smooth animation, a strong gameplay loop, and a high level of challenge. What this means is that simply playing the game feels good. The act of moving and shooting is satisfying. Each run through the game is relatively short, mind you, but reaching the end is very difficult, thus you're encouraged to keep playing, and you do so because it feels so good. That's the basics, but this is enhanced by randomized room placement, which keeps things interesting, not to mention some nice variety in enemies and style. The desert area, for instance, plays rather differently from the earlier facility due to the way the enemies work. So the core gameplay loop is great, but it's the presentation that really pushes it over the top. I appreciate that this game was developed on the original Mega Drive, and that it pushes said hardware in interesting ways. Zeno Crisis throws around tons of sprites, all with lots of animation frames, and it really doesn't slow down, even in 2-player mode. It's really quite a remarkable looking game, and it even has some huge detailed bosses. But it's the audio that impresses even more. Produced by chiptune artist Savaged Regime, the music in Zeno Crisis is just unbelievable for the system. This is all achieved while using a cartridge that would still be feasible in 1994. It's just 4 megabytes or 32 megs. In addition, the game features voice clips played back at 14 kHz, which all sound remarkably crisp for the system.
Zeno Crisis.
So yeah, it's a simple game, but it's a game that I've continued to play since getting my hands on it. It pushes the Mega Drive in interesting ways while delivering a killer combo of excellent gameplay and beautiful visual design. Boneworks is an addition to this list I did not anticipate. Now, I enjoy VR, but I found it difficult to play any VR game for more than 30 minutes due to comfort. Yet, Boneworks has revealed to me that when the content is compelling enough, it isn't as difficult as I thought to remain in VR. You see, Boneworks is, in my mind, a game which delivers a very Valve-like experience in full VR. In many ways, it's this perfect blend of Half-Life and Portal with its own unique twists and turns. It's one of the most engaging, atmospheric, and terrifying games I've ever played. But why? Well, firstly, the developer wasn't afraid to push VR to its limits, sometimes at the cost of comfort. You have full freedom of movement and can interact with just about everything in the environment. Physics are applied to both you and objects around you, and this means you can climb freely and move around the world in rather unique ways while solving problems using sheer ingenuity. This creativity around puzzle solving is really interesting, as sometimes it feels as if there isn't one specific way to solve a problem, and you're just cobbling together things you found around the environment to pull it off. On top of that, the feeling of being there and interacting with everything is just incredible. Never before has missing a jump felt so real. When you fall down into a pit of enemies and have to scramble with your weapons to take them out, reload them and all that, it's really intense. And all of this is wrapped up in an amazingly atmospheric world and narrative that just kept me hooked. It almost feels like I've been to this world rather than simply played a game. That's not to say it doesn't have its fair share of issues, mind you, or that certain parts aren't a little fiddly. It's just that the whole experience overcomes these flaws, and Boneworks is the most engaging VR game I've played to date. As a fan of the Mega Drive, I'm very much into 16-bit style shooters, especially those of the horizontal variety. And it just so happens that Devil Engine is a game that taps directly into that love in a big way. It's a love letter to the 16 and 32-bit era of shooters, and I love it. It's another example of polished gameplay mechanics married with an exceptional presentation. The developer, Protoculture Games, clearly understands what makes a shooter great, and has crafted Devil Engine armed with that knowledge. One of the first things that becomes clear is that this is a very difficult game. Getting through it requires mastery, and the path to mastery is what keeps me playing. One of the first things that becomes clear is that this is a difficult game. Getting through it requires mastery, and that path to mastery is what kept me playing. Basically, it's a game where you can never really let your guard down. Each time you play, you learn more and become more proficient as a result. You'll begin to figure out which weapons fit your playstyle in each new area, and start to take advantage of the burst feature, which lets you kill your multiplier in order to absorb a few bullets instead, as well as speed adjustment. It just starts to feel second nature after a while, though the game really never lets up. The level design itself is also top-notch, with a mix of interesting enemy patterns, navigational challenges, and multi-tiered boss fights. This is combined with an exceptional presentation. The visuals skew more 32-bit, if we're to put a number on it, but with an increase in resolution that feels more akin to Japanese PCs of the era. The pixel art just feels authentic, but with the power of modern technology enabling more sprites and scrolling background layers than you might have seen back in the day. The artwork is just stunning, and it's put to great use throughout. Then there's the soundtrack, composed primarily by Joseph Bailey, which is just exceptional. It recalls the sound of Thunder Force, I suppose, but with its own unique flavor, and it's so good that it's quickly become one of my favorite soundtracks of the last few years. So, Devil Engine is an incredible game then. Unfortunately, there have been some issues with the publisher lately, and as a result, it may not be possible to support the actual developer, Protoculture Games, right now. Thus, I'd suggest looking into the situation more closely before picking it up, if you want to support the developer. Hopefully this will be sorted out though, as the game deserves better. It's just that good. Now here's a game that's just brimming with joy. Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair took me by surprise when it released earlier this year, and it's so good that it made the list. This is effectively the spiritual successor to the original Donkey Kong Country, which makes sense considering the developer, Playtonic Games, was formed by many ex-Rare industry veterans. So what makes this work? Well, for me, it's about the level design and overall flow. Basically, DKC was always about momentum, the mix of rolling and jumping while keeping up your speed. It's something that Retro Studios' excellent DKC games didn't quite capture, but Impossible Lair just nails. Once you master these controls, you'll be flying through the levels at your own pace, and it all just comes together very well. This is of course enhanced by the excellent and creative level design. Each stage is well thought out and interesting to explore, but the real twist comes from your ability to impact the stage via the overworld. This stage, for instance, can freeze over with a blast of ice from the world map. It's clever stuff. And the world map is another key element worth touching on. It's large and complex in a way that I've not really seen in a platform game like this. Unlocking new stages requires exploration and discovery to the point where it almost feels like it's its own unique game. This combination results in one of the most engaging progression systems in any recent platform title, really pushing the Mario-style map system to the next logical step. Even better, with enough skill, you can tackle the game's final level, the Impossible Lair itself, at any point in the game. If you're good enough, you can make it to the end right away. Not that you'll have an easy time doing so. On top of this, as is a theme with this list, Impossible Lair features gorgeous visuals and audio design. It's one of the smoothest Unity-powered console games I've ever played, delivering a stable 60 FPS on every single console without issue. In addition, the art direction itself is excellent and the characters are extremely expressive. It just looks great in motion. The audio is a treat as well, with a soundtrack helmed by the likes of David Wise, Grant Kirkhope, and more. It's exceptionally good. So yeah, the Impossible Lair is another game that really spoke to me this year, and that's why it comes in at number 8. There's a lot of retro-inspired action in this year's list, but Control is perhaps an exception to that rule, at least in part. As the latest title from Remedy, I wasn't entirely certain what to expect when playing Control for the first time, but when I finished, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just experienced. Control might just be Remedy's best game. And it's also its most unique. Rather than playing out as a linear story-driven action game, Control is more of an open-ended exploration action game in the vein of, say, Metroid Prime. You explore the oldest house, unlocking more areas and increasing your power along the way. It's a huge environment packed full of secrets and encounters. The brutalist architecture is unlike anything you've played, and it's just an overwhelmingly creepy place to explore in the best possible way. As a Remedy game, however, the combat also plays a significant role here, but unlike Max Payne, you're capable of bending the very fabric of reality to the point where you'll be flying around the screen and flinging objects like crazy as you progress. The impact of these attacks is increased thanks to a remarkably robust physics engine which sees these objects blasting all over the place. It really enhances your feeling of power. The game manages to balance these two concepts beautifully, resulting in something that feels genuinely fresh. Control also marks the return of Remedy's in-house engine, and if you're playing on the PC, the introduction of real-time ray tracing on supported cards. This is one of the most robust implementations we've seen, and the results are stunning, but even on consoles, it's still a great-looking game. It launched in a rough state on certain machines, unfortunately, but patches have greatly improved performance to the point where I can at least recommend it on most platforms. When you get right down to it, I respect and applaud the weirdness inherent in this game. It feels like a game where the developers had a chance to make exactly what they wanted, without making huge changes designed to increase its mainstream appeal, and I can't recommend it enough. That's right, another game inspired by the classics, but I assure you that Blazing Chrome is well worth experiencing. As a love letter to the likes of Contra and Metal Slug, Blazing Chrome is a challenging, super polished run-and-gun shooter. Made by a very small team in Brazil, Blazing Chrome nails everything you would hope for in this genre. Tight controls, smart level design, killer boss fights, tons of variety, gorgeous pixel art, and a killer soundtrack. From a core gameplay standpoint, Blazing Chrome keeps things relatively streamlined. You have a range of weapons and power-ups available throughout each stage, and your objective is to basically survive. It's simple, but timeless, and it works here. The act of running and gunning just feels satisfying due to the exceptional sprite work and responsive controls, which is then combined with supremely interesting level design. You'll encounter a range of stages, and each stage introduces unique mechanics and concepts that help separate them from the lot. It very much follows in the footsteps of Contra 3 and the hardcore in that sense. What I really love about Blazing Chrome is its slavish devotion to period-appropriate techniques. Rather than simply taking a modern approach to drawing, scaling, and moving sprite objects, Blazing Chrome instead handles it more as you would back in the day. It seems like a minor thing, but I feel it contributes greatly to the overall presentation and experience. It's one thing to design a game with a pixel art aesthetic in mind, but it's another to do it this way. It just feels more authentic. Above all else, I just had a wonderful time playing and replaying Blazing Chrome. Like the best in the Contra series, it's a game that you can pick up and play at any point. It's always great fun, and it always looks stylish. If you've ever loved a Contra game, this is a must-play. There's no other game quite like Death Stranding, and on the surface it just seems like a busywork simulator of sorts, walking from place to place, delivering packages and all that, but if you give it time, it becomes clear that this is something much greater. In many ways, it feels like a throwback to the PS2 era of games, where a large production could appear on shelves with an air of mystery about it. It's a game that was clearly developed without real constraint, for better or for worse, and that results in something truly unique and, I feel, special. The first key ingredient here, though, is traversal. I've all but lost interest in modern open world games as a result of the A to B design. In most games, you simply take a mission at point A and then make your way over to point B. You spend a lot of time between the two waypoints with little to do, and it's just not that interesting. It's as simple as holding a direction as you follow this indicator on your screen in many cases. Death Stranding flips this on its head. The destination is no longer the primary driver, it's now the journey. It's made traversal interesting again. Basically, as you accept each mission, you'll cross hugely varied terrain while facing a range of challenges along the way. As you look out across the world, you'll need to consider the terrain type, the enemies in the area, and your available tools before heading out. The terrain becomes almost a puzzle, and conquering it is a huge part of the appeal here. Along the way, you'll encounter various threats. Enemies which can activate from a significant distance, creating tension as they close the gap. These chases that can ensue, and situations you must deal with, are genuinely interesting and add greatly to the overall experience. You'll have many tools at your disposal as well, but the game never really forces them on the player. You sort of discover them out of necessity as you scramble to escape danger and try to determine the best way to approach a challenge. This is aided by the ability to build structures and interact with the structures of other players. It really feels as if the world is growing and changing as you play. Then there's the narrative aspect. Sure, it has its flaws, but I found the storytelling, characters, and setting to be extremely enjoyable to follow. The situations that occur and the mystery surrounding the nature of the world really never fades. You want to understand what is happening, and it kept me playing right up through the end. In fact, I rarely feel inspired to play through such large open world games, but Death Stranding kept me going for more than 40 hours until I reached the finale. Everything is backed up with a stunning visual presentation which combines brilliant artistic direction with Guerrilla Games' excellent Decima engine to great effect. The character rendering and detail is among the best in the world. When you combine this with the excellent soundtrack, you have the best presentation of the year, at least in my opinion. Death Stranding is certainly a very divisive game, but for me it's also one of the most unique and enjoyable experiences I've had in years, which is why it comes in at number 5. These days, you'll find plenty of games designed to recall the aesthetic of the 90s, and many of them pull this off very well, but Ion Fury is different. Rather than simply simulating the look, the development team went back to use the tools and technology of the past. Ion Fury was created utilizing the build engine, and as a result, feels completely authentic, but also unlike most other shooters on the market today. As a huge fan of games like Doom, Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and the like, Ion Fury reminds us of what makes those games so special. It's all about level design and tight combat. What separates those games from most modern shooters really is that focus on exploration and discovery. The path to the end is never clear. Instead, you must fight your way through each stage, looking for switches, keycards, and secret passages along the way. It's this sense of discovery, of pulling the world apart and understanding its design that is so effective here. You develop a relationship with each map as you play. It just feels satisfying to learn the layout of each map, and this is what I love about these games. Of course, the combat is another key focus here. Utilizing sprites and pixel art weaponry rather than polygons, the game brings back that punch you expect from games of this era. Like many other games I've discussed today, Ion Fury nails the feeling of control. The act of moving and shooting enemies in first person just feels perfect. Every weapon is a blast to use, and learning to prioritize foes keeps you going. In terms of presentation then, the reliance on Build Engine produces a look and feel that differs greatly from most games on the market today. I appreciate just how far the developers have pushed this technology as well. It's still the Build Engine, but this is the most advanced Build Engine game ever made. The quality of the core artwork is simply remarkable, and the tracker music, that's great too, and really contributes to the atmosphere. It's this combination of all these elements that elevates Ion Fury on my list. This perfect blend of fast action, brilliant level design, and beautiful visuals is simply too good. And as with any great shooter, it's all very replayable. If you've ever fallen in love with classic 90s shooters, this is a must-play. In 2002, Resident Evil for Nintendo GameCube set a new standard in terms of what a remake could be, but the second Resident Evil game on PlayStation never received the same treatment, until now. In the 17 years since Remake, a lot has changed in the Resident Evil series, which is why the 2019 release of Resident Evil 2 is such a special achievement. Against the odds, Capcom has managed to perfectly combine the tension and design of the original Resident Evil 2 with the action-driven combat of Resident Evil 4, and it works. The result, Resident Evil 2 is, in my opinion, the best installment in the series since 2005's Resident Evil 4. Firstly, we have the environment itself, and this is key. The Raccoon City Police Department is just as compelling to explore as it ever was, and this remake expands upon its design. Progression is still determined by item-driven puzzles, and there's still a great sense of backtracking and exploration within. Later in the game then, the sewers and underground facilities have been expanded, making this a larger game world overall that still feels fresh despite its roots in 1998. The world here is just so critical to the experience, and the team really pulled it off. But it's the survival element that really brings it all together. While the combat shares similarities with RE4, it's much slower and more tactical. Ammo is limited and enemies are dangerous. Zombies have sort of lost a lot over the years as they've become more commonplace in games, but in Resident Evil 2, they're dangerous again, and this is key. Basically, exploring the station requires you to make your way through areas multiple times, but the viciousness of the enemies means you'll need to carefully plan each trip. Can you make it across the station with the supplies in hand? Which route is best? What about the liquor hiding in that far hallway? It's this management of resources and navigational challenges that really pulls you into the world. I'm also a huge fan of the overall presentation. Claire and Leon are both updated, and while not everyone loves the new designs, I think it looks great. The narrative is still a strong point here, and the remake does a great job retelling this tale in its own way. And everything comes together using Capcom's in-house RE engine to deliver exceptional visual quality at a high frame rate. This is a 60 frames per second experience, well, as long as you play on enhanced consoles or the PC, that is. My only real complaint here is the rather subdued soundtrack, which feels like a step back in some ways, but aside from this, I feel that Capcom absolutely nailed Resident Evil 2. This is a perfect example of how to bring the series forward without sacrificing any part of its legacy. As a result, Resident Evil 2 is now one of my all-time favorite games in the series, and that's why it comes in at number 3. Now this is a game I didn't expect, but here it is. Amid Evil, while previously in early access, finally saw its complete release this year back in June. And let me tell you, this is one of the finest shooters I've played in years. Amid Evil is basically an homage to the likes of Heretic and Hexen, with its own twists. Across 7 massive episodes, you'll blast your way through increasingly complex map design, taking on enemies using a wide range of bizarre weaponry. It's classic 90s stuff to be sure, but what sets Amid Evil apart is its near-perfect level design. At its core, progression is driven by this large hub area, similar I suppose in theory to Hexen, but without the more obscure elements blocking your progress. Each episode then feels decidedly unique, and all of them exhibit extremely intricate level design. That's really the key here. The stages all feel like an evolution of the level design pioneered by games such as Quake, with these huge geometric structures twisting up and all around you at any single point. The thrill comes from figuring out how to proceed while tackling an increasingly difficult series of foes. You see, the combat itself is rather challenging. Enemies pull no punches and can drop your health to 0 in no time at all. As a result, this is a game that requires you to pay close attention to your surroundings while also playing aggressively. And that's really what it comes down to. The development team nailed my favorite style of first-person shooter almost perfectly. I love these fantastic environments and impossible structures mixed with so many different enemy types and weapons. It's an absolute joy to play. And because it's divided up into 7 different episodes, no visual style outstays its welcome. It's full of variety. So yeah, I'm thrilled to see games like this, Ion Fury, Doom 2016, and Dusk find an audience in recent years, as they all demonstrate that this style of shooter is still alive and well. Amid Evil is one of the best. In addition, the game also sports a unique visual style that I found rather pleasing. It features a wide range of modern visual techniques and features, but pairs this with things such as point sample textures and sometimes garish colors. It feels like this perfect blend of new and old visual design, and I love it. Lastly, there's the soundtrack composed by Andrew Hulshult, who has become one of my favorite composers in the industry. Amid Evil certainly does not disappoint here. So yeah, it's a simple thing. There's no complex message here. Rather, Amid Evil is just pure gaming goodness amplified, a perfect mix of old and new. I had so much fun with this game and returned to it many times throughout the year, thus I declare this my second favorite game of 2019. When I reviewed Ace Combat 7 earlier this year, I wasn't sure where it would fall come the end of 2019, but I knew that however the year may play out, it would stand near the top. What I didn't expect was the long-term impact this game left on me. Despite releasing at the very beginning of this year, I have never forgotten my time with Ace Combat 7. If there's ever been a glorious return to form in this industry, Ace Combat 7 is it. After struggling through the last decade with an offshoot and a mildly successful online game, Ace Combat 7 feels like the entry I had been waiting for since 2001. This is one of the most enjoyable flight combat games I've ever played. So what makes it so special? Well, it's a game of harmony. When you take to the skies, Ace Combat 7 perfectly combines the thrill of dogfighting with spectacular visuals, radio chatter, and this wonderful sense of place as you dodge through the peaks and valleys, engage flying monstrosities, and cut through the clouds. Something just pulls me in. Somehow, the developers have taken what seems like a standard set of missions and upped the intensity through the use of narrative, visuals, and audio. It blends everything that makes a video game great into this unbelievable whole. I feel that AC7 also moves the series in the right direction in terms of control. As with many of the best Namco games of the past, it's a perfect blend of arcade and realism. You have your traditional AC style controls first of all, which attempt to simulate certain elements of the flight experience, and it's more polished than ever. But there's also a new mode which plays closer to an arcade game that is equally enjoyable. It really demonstrates how Namco understands the importance of things like camera work, and all of this greatly contributes to the feeling of flight. I also adore the escalation, the missions that are constantly surprising you as you play. What starts as a simple attack run can turn into something entirely different, and the way the mood transitions has a real impact on the experience. It's great stuff. Beyond this, I think that Ace Combat 7 more than anything cemented for me the importance of music in building tension. These moments when you're pushing your craft to the limits, trying to avoid stalling while a barrage of missiles is on your tail. You dive into the clouds and for a moment your objective becomes clear and you let your missiles loose. These moments, that's what I'm talking about. They moved me somehow, and I still think about these battles. In addition, AC7 is an example of a gorgeous 60 frames per second game that showcases to me that Namco still has it when it comes to presentation. From super slick menus, gorgeous vistas, and remarkable cloud cover, it's such a beautiful experience. And if you're on PlayStation 4, it even offers 3 PSVR missions based on scenarios from the previous games. So while it's only 3 missions, the experience of dogfighting in VR is not to be missed. Sometimes when it comes to picking the game of the year, you just have to go with your gut instinct. It's been an amazing year for games, and I've had different games in the top spot throughout the year, but Ace Combat 7 perhaps surprised me the most, and it's a game I haven't stopped thinking about since playing through it. As such, I feel good about selecting this one as my favorite game of 2019. Great job, Namco. And with that, we've reached the end of another year. This is the final video I will be releasing in 2019, so I hope you enjoyed it. There were a ton of great games released this year, and this is only just scratching the surface, so if you want to share your own personal games of the year, don't hesitate to reach out on Twitter or share them below. Thanks for watching Digital Foundry this year, and we'll see you in 2020.